I will be discussing the progress made on my multimedia magazine major work so far, including skills and techniques I've demonstrated, problems and solutions to them, testing of prototypes, and an evaluation of my project overall. My magazine features young people, but also is aimed at young people, so I had to keep that in mind while editing it and make sure that my designs were appropriate and also attracted to by my generation and younger generations. One skill that I've demonstrated quite a bit throughout the entirety of my magazine is the camera raw filter on Photoshop. I've used this tool to not only color correct, but also augment the colors in my photos, allowing them to stand out and look unique. Camera raw filter allowed me to experiment with light and colors. As you can see here, I'm dimming the other colors, allowing the purple to stand out in the photo. I also use camera raw filter to intensify different features on the model's faces. As you can see here, I'm adding texture to the eyes and clarity as well to make them pop. Another skill that I have demonstrated in the process of making my multimedia magazine major work is the pen and curvature tool to create titles and different typography styles for every spread on the magazine. I preferred using this technique over just typing because I found that it was a lot more unique and I had more customization when it came to the styling of each spread. One problem that I did face when using the curvature and pen tool to make unique letters was that sometimes there was an inconsistency in the letters that I was doing and thickness, but I solved that problem by just doing trial and error for each letter and copy and pasting letters that I'd already used, so there was more of a consistency. One example of prototyping in my major work is the tracing of this can on Adobe Illustrator. I wanted to trace manually instead of image trace because I thought that it would show off my skills a little bit more. In the beginning, it was quite challenging trying to accurately trace the can by making it seem realistic still, but also animated. But eventually I got the hang of it and it was quite straightforward adapting to the pen tool. Another skill which I believe I successfully demonstrated in my major work was the manipulation of objects and typography. I used the blending tool to blend two words together to create a three-dimensional stream of a word. I then added an outline to the word to make sure it was still readable, and I'm quite pleased with how the final product turned out. However, one issue that I ran into was the clashing of colors, so I had to change the colors because I don't think they mixed very well together, and I used a color palette to figure out complementing colors, and I'm quite happy with how it turned out to be. Early on in the project, I started some clone prototyping, just so I could get an idea how easy the process would be because I knew I was going to use a lot of cloning throughout my magazine. When cutting out my subjects, it was a lot more difficult than I thought because I realized that automatically cutting them out wasn't as accurate as I would have liked, and I had to manually go in and select and mask and erase the background. Once I successfully selected the subjects, I added them into a new background with the cloned version of themselves and successfully blended them into the background without it looking too unrealistic but also looking comical at the same time. I also played with blending options on the photos to sort of add a burned look to the shadows of the subjects, which I quite liked, and I feel as though this demonstrated my skills in composition. This specific prototype allowed me to experiment with cloning, colors, lighting, and overall composition, which I can apply to other spreads in my magazine as well. In Adobe Illustrator, I also showed my skills in graphic design through creating freehand graphics, which I copy and pasted throughout an entire page. Instead of applying the pattern tool to my graphics, I decided to copy and paste them, which would end up with a more inconsistent look and be asymmetrical, which was the goal I had in mind. Once satisfied with the arrangement of these graphics, I decided to color them the same color as the text that was in focus in the middle of the page. And here is the final result, which I'm quite happy with. I also used Adobe Illustrator to create a background for a couple of my images. I started by drawing white dots symmetrically across the page. I could have used the pattern tool to do this, however, I was not aware of it, which was a major waste of time because this did take me quite a while to make. When it came to coloring the background, I ended up using an album color to help me swatch the colors because I really liked that shade of purple. I then decided to use an envelope mesh to warp the background and distort the symmetrical circles. It took me a while to perfect the warping because I didn't want it to be too over the top but also not too basic at the same time. But after a couple of minutes of trial and error, I became pleased with what I had created.